Good morning, everyone. You should have completed our warm-up for today. If you guys have any questions with it, we can talk tomorrow about it, if there's something that didn't quite make sense with it. We're going to be moving into our next unit, taking a look at solving inequalities. The really great thing about this is that solving inequalities is almost identical to solving equations, and you guys have become fantastic at solving equations. So inequalities won't be anything different with one exception. So that's what we're going to take a look at. We're only going to focus on one-step inequalities today, and then we'll move through multi-step inequalities and things like that throughout the remainder of this week. So just to refresh your memory about what an inequality is, we haven't talked about it since last year, but remember, an inequality is an open sentence that contains these four symbols. Remember, we read from left to right. So this is really the less than symbol because the little end of the inequality comes first. This is the greater than symbol because the big end of the inequality comes first when we read it. This is the less than or equal to because it has that equal to part on it. And this one is the greater than or equal to because, again, the big end comes first and it has that line underneath of it. So what we're going to be looking at today is we're going to be taking a look at how do we solve some equations that look like this. And if I say equations, please know that I mean inequalities. I use them interchangeably. I should be really consistent, but I say equations quite a bit. But anyways, this inequality, we're going to be learning how to solve that, and it's actually going to come up with this as an answer. So I want you guys to just kind of be thinking how you might do that. And I think some of you guys will already get it. Before we do that, we want to actually graph our solutions that we get when we solve, because there's not going to be just one number for an answer. There's actually going to be lots of numbers that are answers to our solutions when we're graphing them. So let's review on how do we graph them. I know that you guys did this last year, so hopefully this is kind of a review for you guys. Some important things up in the box here. You're always going to shade in the direction of your solutions. So my big hint to you is if your variable is first, you're going to shade in the direction your symbol points. So for example, down here, my letter comes first. The arrow points to the left, like if you think about this as an arrow, it's pointing to the left. So that's why we're shading towards the left in this first example. And in this one over here, letter comes first, and the big end of the inequality comes first, and so the arrow is pointing to the right. And notice that we're shading towards the right. The arrows on my lines match up with the inequality symbol. And again, this only works if the letter comes first. We're going to talk about what happens if the letter doesn't here in a little bit and how you can fix that to make it easier. But let's review from last year as well, as far as, remember, sometimes we had open circles and sometimes we had closed circles. Remember, open circles are when there's no equal to part here. There's no line underneath the inequality symbol. The circle's filled in if you have that equal to part. Last year we talked about when you have to take that extra step to write in that equal sign with the inequality, you have to take that extra step and fill in the circle. So we're going to practice graphing before we get into solving, because when we're solving, we're going to do both. Okay, let's take a look at some graphing. We did these last year. When we did them last year, I had you guys make a number line that had to have at least 3 numbers on it. The number in the inequality, a number bigger, and a number smaller. Basically, it's just a check to make sure you're shading in the correct direction. Sometimes when we're working with negative numbers, students are shading a little bit different. So this is a way just to check to make sure you're shading correctly. Now if we take a look, first I want to make sure, does my letter come first? Sweet. My letter comes first. I get to apply exactly the rules that we've been using. I'm going to put an open circle at 1 because it does not have the equal to sign. And then notice the arrow is pointing to the left, so my line or my shading is also going to be to the left. And on Schoology, on Notability, if you guys want to use the highlighter, and if you want to highlight to show your answers, something like this, that's fine with me too, as long as I can clearly see which way you're shading, and if your circle is open or closed. All right, let's take a look at example B. So for this one, I'm going to start with my number line. Negative 12 goes in the middle. Careful with these. A number bigger means we're getting closer to 0. A number smaller means we're going further away from 0 when we're working with our negatives. Now, hopefully you're recognizing that, hey, Mrs. Haugen, the letter doesn't come first. It's not the first thing that I see. So we're going to think about just flipping everything on its end, okay? So I'm going to put, instead of writing the number first, I'm going to write the letter first and put my number second. When we physically move what comes first, whether the letter or the number comes first, the inequality has to flip as well. So the little end came first. I'm going to change it so the big end comes first. Because you'll notice the big end is still facing the Z in both situations. I want that inequality symbol to be facing the exact same direction towards the letter. This helps us writing it this way because then I can use the exact same rule that we used here. I'm going to put an open circle at negative 12, and this time my inequality symbol points towards the right, so I'm either going to shade or highlight that I'm going to the right for my solutions. I want bigger numbers than negative 12. Let's take a look at example C. Guys are going to get really good at graphing these throughout this unit. So if you're struggling with it, it's okay. You will get much better with it, and I can definitely help you guys with it tomorrow. But you guys will get really good at this. All right, let's take a look at example C. Always start with your number line. Negative 4 goes in the middle. Careful, a number bigger, negative 3. A number smaller, negative 5. Then check your inequality to make sure it's written the way that we want it to. I take a look here and I read a number first. Barf, I don't want that to happen. So we're just going to flip everything on its end. So instead of the negative 4 coming first, I'm going to put my letter and the number comes second. Then I'm going to flip the inequality symbol as well. So the big end was first. Now I'm going to put the little end to come first. And again, the purpose of doing this is just to make our graphing a lot easier for us. It is doable to do it without flipping it, but I'll tell you guys what, students have more success if they just flip everything on its end to put that letter to come first. All right, let's look at graphing it then. So to graph it, this time I'm going to fill in my circle at negative 4 because it has that equal to part on it. So because it has that equal to part, we have to take that next step and fill in the circle. And now we're going to shade. My inequality symbol, once we flipped it, now has the little end coming first, so we're shading towards the left. Because I want numbers smaller than negative 4. What I would like you guys to do, I would like you guys to try example D. So see if you guys can do this one. As you're graphing it, think about, does your letter come first or does it come second? Remember, we always like the letter to come first. Okay, your graph should look something like what mine is. Should have an closed circle and shading towards the bigger numbers. This is a nice one because our letter comes first, so I don't have to switch anything around at all. We are ready to go ahead and graph it. All right, let's take a look at now how do we solve. Again, we're going to be solving and graphing on the rest of the examples that we're doing today. I want to remind you guys about some things when we're solving one-step inequalities. If we see subtraction, we're going to do the opposite and add. The opposite of addition is subtraction. The opposite of multiplication is division. The opposite of division is multiplying. You guys can check your answers if you want. I'm not going to really kind of focus on that at all. Because you guys are really good about solving to start with. So just think about always doing the opposite of what's given there, and you're going to be golden. So example A, I saw the letter C. I'm still going to put a line through my inequality symbol, just like we did when we did equations. This one, there's technically two ways to do it. A lot of you guys really enjoy doing keep, change, change, which I definitely encourage you to do. And remember, we want to think about getting C by itself. So we're going to move over the negative 12 by adding 12 to both sides. So when we add 12 to both sides, 65 plus 12 is 77, and the inequality symbol still goes in the middle. Make sure you're not writing an equation sign. A lot of students tend to start writing equation signs, and again, I have to mark them wrong because we're going to learn here in a little bit the significance of the inequality symbol. So make sure when you're writing your answer, make sure you have an inequality symbol in there. And now let's graph it. 77 in the middle, 78, 76. Check. Letter comes first. Fantastic. I'm going to put an open circle at 77. Arrows pointing to the right. So I'm going to shade to the right. So what this is doing is it's saying that any number that's 77 or bigger is going to make this inequality true. I could choose 100 and this inequality would be true. I could use 1,000,000. This inequality will be true. But as soon as I go below 77, it will not be true anymore. I would get a false inequality. Let's take a look at example B. Line through our inequality symbol, trying to solve for x. I'm adding 23 to it, so we're going to undo that by subtracting 23. So x is less than or equal to -9. And again, use your calculators to help yourself out, because some of you guys struggle with this, but you guys are also really good about knowing to use your calculators. Let's graph it. -9, -8 is bigger, -10 is smaller. This time we're going to have a closed circle because it has the equal to part. And my letter comes first. Fantastic. Arrow is pointing to the left, so I'm going to be shading to the left of my dots. If you guys have questions on these two, help each other out so that way you're all good with it. Now let's take a look at example C. Line through my inequality. I see subtraction, so I'm going to do keep, change, change. And again, we're always trying to get x by itself. So to move that -8 over, we're going to add 8 to both sides. 22 plus 8 is 30. Don't forget the inequality symbol, and then your x. And just so you know, it's super important that when you're writing your answers, you're writing it so they go down like this, just to make sure you get everything in the correct spot. Unlike our equations where we could put x first or we could put the number first, with inequalities, things have to stay in the same spot. So the x needs to stay here, and your numbers as you're solving will be over here as you're going through your process of solving. So here's my answer, and let's graph. Hopefully you're noticing there's an equal to on there, so we're going to have a closed circle. And then I hope a lot of you guys are like, Mrs. Haugen, the letter doesn't come first in our inequality symbol, with our inequality. So because the letter doesn't come first, we're going to flip everything on its end. So we're going to go x and then our 30. And I'm going to flip it. Instead of the big end coming first, I'm going to put the little end first. So now because my letter comes first, I see that my arrow is pointing to the left, so I'm going to shade towards the left. Now let me stress on this one. This right here, the only reason why we're doing this is to make graphing easier for us. It's the only way we do this. This is your answer, but we're using it, we're flipping everything to make it easier for graphing. Okay? It's the only reason why we're doing this. If you have questions on that one, help each other out with it. Otherwise, I want you guys to try example D. Solve it and graph it for me, and press play to see if we agree with our answer at the end. All right, on example D, you should have added 14 to both sides. X is greater than -5. Made your number line with your 3 numbers. Open circle. Hopefully you remembered, we like it when the letter comes first. So you get to shade in the direction the arrow is pointing. Arrow is pointing to the right, so I'm shading towards the right. Now as I was working this problem, I got to thinking sometimes I struggle with my lefts and rights. I know I'm shocking, I'm sure. But to help you to make sure you're shading the correct direction, notice that when I'm making my inequality symbol, it is matching identical to the arrow that I'm putting at the end of my line. Now, something you might be asking, am I going to mark it wrong if you don't put an arrow at the end of your shading here? No. Technically you're supposed to, but I won't mark it wrong if you don't put an arrow. It's a good check to make sure you did shade in the correct direction. Alright, well of course we have to have some word problems. Why wouldn't we? So let's take a look at this one. So it says Celio wants to buy season passes to 2 theme parks. If one season pass costs $54.99 and he has $100 to spend on both passes, how much can Celio spend on the second pass? We're going to write an inequality and graph the solutions. Okay? Now, this is one I know there are multiple ways to do it, but we want to write an inequality. So when we think about the 2 things that we can do, we're going to be buying 2 season passes. When we buy these 2 season passes, I think about adding those 2 amounts together. So I know one of my passes is $54.99. And I'm going to add it to my other pass that I want to buy. Now, my question for you is, can we go over $100 or do we have to stay under $100? Hopefully you're thinking that you have to stay under $100 because that's all the money he has. My other question is, could he have exactly $100? And the answer is yes. He could go right up to $100, have no change left over. So we're going to put the equal to part on it. This is our inequality then. We're going to solve this inequality in order for us to graph the solutions. So let's solve it. Here's my x. So I'm going to subtract $54.99 on both sides. So my second pass has to be less than or equal to $45.01. As soon as my second pass goes over, I don't have enough money anymore. So that's what the purpose of this inequality is for, is to figure out what's the maximum we can spend on this other pass. So let's graph this, because that's the other part of this. So 4501. Now, when you're making your number line, you can pick any number bigger or any number smaller. When dealing with decimals, I'll be honest, I just go up 1 whole number and I go down 1 whole number is what I typically do. But as long as you do something bigger, something smaller, you're totally fine. Has the equal to, so I'm going to put a closed circle. Arrow is pointing to the left because my letter comes first. So I'm going to shade towards the left. Which hopefully makes sense to you guys that he has to spend less than that in order for him to be able to purchase both passes. if you guys have questions on that, see if you guys can help each other out. Otherwise, we're going to move to the one and only thing that is different about inequalities. And it occurs when we're working with negatives. And do you guys remember last year I had that bicorn on my cart? That's what we use this for. I don't have it at home with me, but whenever we are multiplying or dividing both sides of your inequality by negative number, bells and whistles need to be going off in your head because you need to think about flipping the switch. And that means you're going to turn your inequality symbol over. And we have to do this anytime that we're multiplying or dividing by a negative number. It is only when it's with a negative number. And again, this is the only thing that's different between equations and inequalities. So let's practice this. Let's solve each inequality and again graph. Line through my inequality. Here's my letter. And we would read this as 12 times k. So to undo multiplication, we're going to divide both sides by 12. Now here's a question. Did we divide by a negative here? Nope. Our inequality symbol gets to stay exactly as is. So k is greater than or equal to 5. Graphing it. We get 5 is greater than or equal to, k is greater than or equal to 5. Questions on A, help each other out. On B, line through our inequality symbol. Trying to solve for Q. We read this as negative 8 times Q. So to undo multiplication, we're going to divide. Now right now, I want you guys to have bells and whistles going off in your head right now. Imagine they're going off. They will be tomorrow. We divided by a negative 8. That means we are switching the inequality symbol because we divided by a negative. So instead of the little end coming first, our big end comes first. And again, that's the one and only thing that's different between equations and inequalities. Then 136 divided by negative 8 is negative 17. So our answer is Q is greater than or equal to negative 17. Graphing it. Open circle. When we do our shading, we always look with our answer. Our answer has the letter comes first, shading towards the right. So my answer will look like this for graphing. So any number bigger than negative 17 will make this inequality be true. Let's move on to C. This time my letter is on the right-hand side, so I want to think about getting rid of the 6 on this one to get rid of the number connected to the letter. I'm going to divide both sides by 6. Now, think to yourself, did we divide by a negative here? No. There is a negative here, but we have to be dividing by a negative. So this is what has to be negative. Because this is not negative, our inequality symbol will stay exactly the same for our solution. So negative 7 is greater than R. Questions on that one? If so, see if you guys can help each other out. Graphing it. Negative 8, negative 7, negative 6. Open circle. Now I hope you guys are thinking, Mrs. Haugen, but my letter doesn't come first. You are exactly right. So only for graphing purposes, we are going to switch this entire inequality on its head, only for us to be able to graph it. So I'm going to put the r to come first. -7 comes second. And then because we switched those two around, the inequality symbol switches as well. Now we know we need to shade towards the left. And again, let me stress this. The only reason why we did this here is to help us with graphing. It's the only reason. This is our answer, but we're going to use this to help us with our graphing because it means the same thing. Help each other out if you guys have questions on this one. Otherwise, let's take a look at these examples. All right, on this next one, line through our inequality. Here's my letter. This one there's there's 3 ways you could do this one. My guess is what most of you guys will do is you'll say, hey, Mrs. Haugen, we would read this as -3/5 times d. So to undo multiplication, you guys would divide by -3/5. And again, hopefully you guys are thinking, bells and whistles, Mrs. Haugen, bells and whistles, because we're dividing by a negative. So when we divide by a negative number, our inequality switches. So instead of the big end, I'm going to put the little end to come first. And then you guys can use your calculators here to be able to calculate that. And it looks like, as long as I can read my answer key okay, it looks like it's a -10. So D is less than or equal to -10. Graphing. Close circle at -10. Do a check. Does your letter come first? Fantastic. So I'm going to shade towards the left on this one. All right, let's take a look at example E. For example E, technically there's a couple ways you can do this one too. I'm going to put my line through my inequality symbol. Now this one, remember your negative can go with any part of the fraction. So I want you guys to think about if there's just a number, you can think about that negative just being with the number. So that way you don't have to do multiple steps with this one. Because on this one, my hope is that you guys would read this as n divided by -6. And then to undo division, we multiply both sides by -6. And on this one, I want you guys to be thinking bells and whistles, because our rule with switching the inequality symbol applies when we are multiplying or dividing. So either when you're multiplying by a number that's negative or dividing by a number that's negative. So this one we multiplied by a negative, so we have to flip that inequality symbol. So it becomes greater than or equal to. So we have n greater than or equal to -48. Something that's important that sometimes students will do when they do this flipping here is they forget this equal to part. So the inequality symbol, everything stays the same except for it's just flipped. So instead of the small end coming first, it's the big one. If it had the equal to, it stays. If it didn't, we don't write it. Graphing. Here's what your graph should look like because your letter comes first. In all honesty, you guys, most of the time your letter is going to come first just because mathematicians tend to write the letter first anyways. But you do want to pay attention if the letter does not come first and what you need to do to help with graphing it. So in this one, your graph should look something like this. On example F, again, this one has a couple ways to do it. My guess most of you guys are going to divide by 1/5 because you'd read that as 1/5 times m. So we're going to divide both sides by 1/5. Did we divide by a negative? Hopefully you guys are all thinking no, because this 1/5 is not negative. This is, but we have to actually say divided by the number. This is the part that has to be negative. So my inequality symbol gets to stay exactly the same. And our answer is m is greater than or equal to -5. Graphing it. And you guys are probably already even better at graphing now than you were at the start of the lesson because you're doing it so much and you're going to be doing it through this entire unit. Like I said, you're going to get really good with it and you're going to be probably annoyed with me in the amount of graphing that you're going to be doing. Letter comes first. So in this case, we get to shade to the right on that one. If you guys have questions about these three, help each other out so that way everyone can be successful in the homework assignment. And last but not least, of course, we have a word problem. So we're going to write an inequality for this one, and I didn't put in the directions to graph it, but we are going to be graphing as well. So this one, it says LeBron walks at a rate of 3/4 miles per hour. He knows that it is at least 9 miles to Onk's Lake. How long will it take LeBron to get there? So my hope for you guys as you're reading this problem is you're recognizing the word per. What have we used the word per to mean for a specific operation? And hopefully you guys are saying multiplication. So this inequality is 3/4 times x because we don't know how many hours he walked. If he knows it's at least 9 miles, at least means that has to be bigger than or equal to 9. Here's our inequality. Let's solve it. Divide by 3/4. So x is greater than or equal to 12. So it's going to take him 12 or more hours to walk to this lake if that's the pace that he's walking at. I know, not a super realistic problem, just one I totally made up. And graphing it. Close circle. Letter comes first. So we're shading towards the right on this one. Now, I'm going to tell you one quick thing on the homework assignment. When you get to the word problems, some of them are not real world situations. They're ones where you're using, it's just, it'll say 3/4 times x is more than 9 kind of thing. So it'll be much more explicit. There are a couple real world situations as well that I want you guys to practice with, okay? I think you guys are going to be finding the more just direct ones, and that's why I didn't include them in the lesson, but I wanted to practice ones like these, okay? So you guys have the rest of the time to work on the one-step inequalities worksheet, which is due tomorrow, and then we're going to do our warm-ups this week, and we'll have a quiz Friday at the start of class for that. Otherwise, I will see you guys tomorrow. Hopefully I'm nice and refreshed coming back from Vegas.